Yeah, hopefully my doing this constantly wasn't distracting.
I was like doing this. I'm like,
Lights
stop
came
moving the
on.
chair.
I know, I'm
Like a
spinning
toddler in this thing.
Hi, I'm Carolyn Wendorf. I'm the Regional Vice President of the Midwest region. And with me today is Casey Bonner, Senior Underwriter out of the Northeast, Janelle Quinn, AVP Sales and Distribution out of the New England region, and Robert Ussery, AVP Underwriting out of the South Central region. Today we are going to be debunking prevalent misconceptions regarding environmental insurance and what brokers and customers often get wrong about the industry. So Casey, do you want to talk a little bit about maybe the history of environmental and how we at Berkeley Environmental define environmental insurance?
Yeah, I can go start off with that. Basically, what I like to do, I'm kind of a history buff, and I like to kind of look at where environmental insurance really came from. And that goes back to the 70s and 80s when the absolute pollution exclusion started to hit the general casualty world. So out of that came the entire environmental industry to fill the need for these coverages. If pollution doesn't immediately go away because you excluded in the ISO world, those operations, those abatement contractors, those remediation contractors, they need affirmative coverage grants. And that's where all this has kind of evolved over the years. And it's really interesting to kind of see. And it continues to evolve. In the early 2000s, molds started to get excluded from the standard ISO world. That fire water restoration contractors didn't cease working. They needed affirmative grants to cover their exposures there and protect the capital of their companies. So that's where environmental kind of got its birth. That's the need that we continue to fill, and it continues to evolve year over year over year. You can even kind of see it right now with cyber, a whole different industry than ours, but those exclusions hit the ISO world, and now there's a whole blooming cyber industry out there.
It has been interesting to see the evolution of it in my career. I mean, I've been doing environmental insurance for 18 years, and the ups and flows, mold coming and going and resurgence of it. And then, the emerging issues that are coming out now around PFAS, or, 10, 15 years ago it was MTBE. I mean, there's always something new that's coming out that we have to respond to as an industry. And so, the world that we live in now is not the same that it was when I started 18 years ago or when the industry started 40 years ago.
A lot of insurers don't think that they have a pollution exposure, but really every company does. In talking about cyber, I think, my background actually about 15, 20 years ago was on the financial line side of things and cyber. And it was a new thing back in, 2007, 8, and it was a discretionary buy. And so sometimes you quote something, it would sit out there for a year and people said, it's not going to happen to me. It's not going to happen to me. And then it happened to their neighbor, down the street, and they lost their shirts on cyber claims for, cyber and just personal information. It was like hard copies of things still in offices at that time. And so sometimes I make the correlation between the two. It's like, you might not think you have the exposure right now because it's not being mandated by a contract for CPL or site pollution, but it can happen. So I just think people are getting a little bit more in tune with what's going on. They're paying more attention. And I think there is a lot more requirements contractually for businesses to have these types of insurance.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Janelle, that, it's definitely, I think it started with like contractual obligations, and then people now are really seeing the need for buying coverage, even if it's not required, because with pollution claims, it's not, a frequency issue, it's going to be a severity issue. So to buy a pollution policy, for $25,000, $50,000 to have, $1 million limit to cover you, peace of mind coverage. So I think that's really kind of critical and something that's sort of evolved over time as well.
Sleep insurance, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that, a lot of contractors or businesses in general don't understand that certain things are pollution exposures. I mean, it was really eye-opening for me probably 15 years ago to start seeing silt and sediment claims. We would have runoff of, really just dirt that would get into the wrong place, but, that's considered a pollution condition. I've seen manufacturing facilities have pollution claims from like plastics that run off and get into the waterway that have to be cleaned up. So when you define, what is pollution, it really can vary. And I think a lot of people don't realize that, and they're hanging their hat on coverage in their ISO-GL form, and in many instances, it's not there.
If you look at the ISO-GL world for a lot of contractors, sometimes they have really limited S&A pollution endorsements that are attached to that. But if you kind of boil them down, they're really generally very strictly time limited. So there's only, a day or two to have a claim and report it. Generally speaking, they can have caveats in there around the legacy issues at a site. So if you're working at a site that ever had a prior pollution incident, sometimes that stuff excluded. And many contractors are not looking at that job by job by job to see if they have the coverage that they think that they do. Whereas they can come to Berkeley Environmental, and we have policies that are strictly geared to, coverage grants in the CPL world, in the site world, in the products pollution world, that can basically kind of dovetail and address the issues that they have for these projects they take on.
Yeah. And to expand upon that, one of our capabilities as a surplus lines market, we have the ability to do manuscript forms, manuscript endorsements for very specific needs, scenarios, contractual, just basic coverage needs. I mean, in my role, that's something that I do all the time. And, every single day we come up with forms and endorsements that are specific to our insured. So we have that flexibility to actually write the coverage and tailor it very specifically for their need.